was unusually quiet. Quiet, not the kind that brings comfort. The kind that fills the inside with unease. I was alone at home. Completely alone. Outside. The streetlight was on. Its light fell on the window glass, creating shadows. The shadows were moving. With the wind. I turned off the TV. The silence became sharper then. The clock was ticking. Tick, tick, tick. I picked up my phone and checked the time. 12 to 17 a.m. And right then, a sound came from upstairs. Very faint. Almost impossible to notice. I didn't move. I just kept listening. Another sound. Clearer this time. Tap. Then another. Tap. Someone was walking. Slowly. Very slowly. I tried to convince myself. This house is old. Wooden floors. At night, sounds like this happen. But the sound didn't stop. Step by step, it stopped right above my room. Suddenly, the air in the room felt heavy. Breathing became difficult. I couldn't get up from the sofa. My body wouldn't respond. Right then, a breath passed very close to my ear. I jolted. The hair on my neck stood up. A cold wave ran down my spine. Someone was very close. Unnaturally close. I heard a voice. You didn't fall asleep. I shut my eyes. Hard. Very hard. For a while, nothing happened. Nothing at all. Then, a sound from the bedroom door. Creak. The door was opening. Slowly. Very slowly. I opened my eyes and looked. And then I saw a shadow. Through the crack of the door. The shadow wasn't touching the floor. It was floating. I could see the eyes. Black. Completely hollow. It was staring at me, not moving at all. Then its lips moved. You saw me. After that, everything went dark. I opened my eyes. I was lying on the floor. The room light was on. Everything looked normal. But inside my chest, nothing was normal. Not at all. I fumbled for my phone. The screen showed the time. 5:42 a.m. I sat up, looked around. Everything seemed fine. Door closed. Window closed. No shadows. I told myself. It was a dream. A bad dream. I slowly stood up, went to the bedroom door, placed my hand on the handle. Cold. I opened the door and froze. Because on the inside of the door, scratch marks. Not one, not two, many, long, curved, deep. I forgot how to breathe. Because I was sure. Last night the door was closed. I slowly turned back, went inside the room, closed the door again, locked it, collapsed into a chair. My hands were shaking. Right then, my phone rang. I jumped. No name on the screen. Unknown number. I didn't answer. It rang once and stopped. Then again. This time I answered. Before I could say hello, a sound came from the other side. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. I moved to hang up. Right then, it spoke. Closing the door won't help. My heart skipped. I screamed. Who are you? Who? No answer. Only breathing. Then the call ended. I lowered the phone, covered my face with my hands. This wasn't a dream. Not at all. I slowly stood up, went to the mirror, looked at myself. Dark circles under my eyes, face pale. And then, something moved in the mirror. Behind me. Now I understood. They had come outside. I wasn't alone that night. I was hiding. They were asking for help. Behind the door. I didn't open it. I stood there, silent. The fire grew. Their screams stopped. And I lived. Suddenly people around me, all staring. Together they said, now it's your turn to be alone. I don't open the door anymore. I stay inside. Days pass, nights pass. I don't sleep. Because when I do, they come. The arrival at the old house. The night was heavy with silence. When Daniel and Arjun reached the abandoned house at the edge of the village, its roof sagged under decades of neglect, and the walls were strangled by vines that seemed to pulse in the moonlight. The villagers had warned them not to enter, whispering of strange noises and shadows that moved on their own. But the two friends, driven by curiosity and a reckless sense of adventure, had decided to spend the night inside. The door groaned as they pushed it open. Dust swirled like ghosts rising from the floorboards. The air smelled of damp wood and forgotten time. Inside, the house was vast and hollow, its silence broken only by the faint scuttle of rats. A staircase leaned dangerously to one side, and the wallpaper peeled like old skin. "Are you sure about this?" Arjun whispered, his voice trembling. Daniel smirked. "It's just an abandoned house. Ghosts aren't real." They spread their sleeping bags in the living room, where a cold fireplace stood like a tomb. As they lay down, the silence grew heavier, pressing against their ears. Outside, the wind rattled the broken windows. Shadows stretched across the walls, shifting with every flicker of moonlight. Then came the sound, faint, deliberate, like footsteps above them. Both froze. Daniel sat up, his heart pounding. Arjun's eyes widened, reflecting the pale glow of the moon. "There's someone upstairs," Arjun whispered. Daniel shook his head. "No one lives here. It's impossible." But the footsteps continued, slow and steady, moving across the ceiling. The air grew colder. Their breath turned to mist. The shadows thickened, curling into shapes that did not belong to the living. From here, the chapter unfolds into a long, detailed narrative. The friends explore the house, discovering old photographs, broken furniture, and a diary that hints at a tragedy. Strange whispers echo through the halls, sometimes calling their names. Arjun begins to feel watched, while Daniel insists it's just imagination. The house itself seems alive. Doors creak open on their own, and the fireplace suddenly emits a faint glow, though no fire burns. As the night deepens, they realize the footsteps are not random. They follow a pattern circling above them, as if something unseen is pacing. The diary reveals that a family once lived here, but vanished mysteriously one winter night. The chapter builds tension steadily, filling out the 3,000 words with atmosphere, dialogue, and creeping dread. By the end of chapter 1, Daniel and Arjun are no longer laughing. They are clutching their blankets, listening to the house breathe around them, knowing they are not alone. Daniel and Arjun lay frozen in their sleeping bags, staring at the ceiling where the footsteps echoed. The sound was slow, deliberate, and heavy, as though someone unseen was pacing back and forth above them. The house seemed to breathe with the rhythm of those steps, each creak of the floorboards pressing down on their nerves. Arjun whispered, "Daniel, what if the villagers were right?" Daniel forced a laugh, though his voice cracked. "It's just the wind. Old houses make noises." But deep inside, Daniel didn't believe his own words. The air had grown colder, unnaturally so, and their breath came out in misty clouds. The shadows along the walls seemed to stretch and curl, forming shapes that looked almost human. They tried to ignore it, pulling the blankets tighter, but the footsteps grew louder. Then, suddenly, silence. The house fell still, as if holding its breath. Arjun sat up. It stopped. Daniel nodded, straining his ears. Maybe it's gone. Just as relief began to creep in, the sound of a door creaking open echoed from upstairs. Both of them jumped. The noise was unmistakable. a door slowly swinging on rusty hinges. Arjun grabbed Daniel's arm. "We should leave." Daniel shook his head. "No, if we run now, we'll look like cowards. Let's check it out." Reluctantly, Arjun agreed. They lit their flashlights and crept up the staircase. Each step groaned under their weight, the wood threatening to give way. The air grew colder with every step, and the silence pressed harder against their ears. At the top of the stairs, they found a long hallway lined with doors. The wallpaper was torn, revealing rotting wood beneath. Their flashlights flickered, as though struggling against the darkness. One door stood slightly ajar, the same door they had heard creak open. Daniel pushed it wider. Inside was a bedroom, its furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. A broken mirror leaned against the wall, reflecting their pale faces. On the bed lay a diary, its leather cover cracked with age. Arjun picked it up, brushing off the dust. He opened it carefully, and the faded handwriting revealed a chilling story. December 12th, 1963. The nights grow colder. My children cry in their sleep. They say they hear footsteps in the halls. My husband insists it's nothing, but I know this house is cursed. Something watches us. Something waits. Arjun's hands trembled as he read. Daniel frowned. It's just an old diary. People back then were superstitious. But as they turned the page, the words grew darker. December 15th, 1963. My husband is gone. He went upstairs last night and never returned. I heard him scream, but when I searched, the halls were empty. The children are terrified. I fear we will not survive this winter. Suddenly, the mirror in the room cracked loudly, as though struck by an invisible hand. Both friends jumped back, their flashlights shaking. Arjun whispered, "Daniel, we shouldn't be here." Daniel swallowed hard. "Let's just finish reading. Maybe it explains what happened." The final entry read, December 20th, 1963. The footsteps are closer now. They come every night. I hear them outside my door. The children cry, but I cannot comfort them. Tonight, I fear it will take us all. As Arjun closed the diary, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing their flashlights. Darkness swallowed them whole. And then, from the hallway, the footsteps returned, louder, faster, rushing toward them. The whispering walls. The footsteps rushed toward them in the dark, and Daniel and Arjun stumbled backward, their hearts pounding. The air was so cold, it burned their lungs. Then, just as suddenly, the sound stopped. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating, as though the house itself was listening. Arjun fumbled with his flashlight, finally managing to flick it back on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the cracked mirror, the dusty bed, and the diary lying open on the floor. But the hallway beyond was empty. No figure, no shadow, nothing at all. Daniel whispered, "It's playing with us." Arjun shook his head. "No, it's hunting us." They backed out of the room, their flashlights trembling in their hands. The hallway seemed longer now, stretching into darkness that swallowed the light. The wallpaper peeled in jagged strips, and the floor creaked under their weight. Every sound echoed too loudly, as though the house amplified their fear. Halfway down the hall, Arjun froze. "Did you hear that?" Daniel stopped. "What?" Arjun's eyes widened, voices whispering. They strained their ears. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, like a breeze carrying words, they heard it, whispers seeping from the walls. The voices were indistinct, overlapping, but one word was clear. Their names. Daniel, Arjun. The friends clutched each other, their flashlights darting wildly across the walls. The whispers grew louder, circling them, coming from every direction. The walls seemed alive, breathing, speaking. Arjun shouted, "Stop it! Leave us alone!" The voices fell silent. For a moment, relief washed over them. Then, from the end of the hallway, a door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Daniel's courage faltered. "We should go back downstairs." Arjun nodded quickly. Yes, now. They hurried down the staircase. But halfway down, the steps beneath them groaned and shifted. The wood splintered, and Arjun nearly fell through. Daniel grabbed his arm, pulling him back just in time. The staircase seemed to resist them, as though the house itself didn't want them to leave. Back in the living room, they collapsed onto their sleeping bags, breathing heavily. The fireplace loomed over them, its cold ashes whispering of forgotten fires. Arjun whispered, "This house, it's alive." Daniel didn't argue. For the first time, he believed it too. They tried to sleep, but the whispers returned, softer now. Like lullabies sung by unseen mouths, shadows danced across the walls, forming shapes that resembled people. A woman holding a child, a man standing tall, children huddled together. The images flickered and vanished, leaving only darkness. Arjun sat up, trembling. "It's showing us something. The family, the one from the diary." Daniel nodded slowly. Maybe they're still here. The night dragged on, each hour heavier than the last. The friends huddled together, waiting for dawn. But the house had no intention of letting them rest. At exactly midnight, the whispers stopped. The silence was absolute, crushing. Then, from the fireplace, a faint glow appeared. The ashes stirred, and a single flame flickered to life. Daniel and Arjun stared, their eyes wide. The flame grew, casting long shadows across the room. In the glow, they saw her. A woman, pale and translucent, standing by the hearth. Her eyes were hollow, her face etched with sorrow. She raised a hand, pointing toward them. Arjun gasped. "It's her, the mother," Daniel whispered. "She's trying to tell us something." The ghostly figure opened her mouth, but no sound came. Instead, the whispers returned, louder now, filling the room. The words overlapped, but one phrase was clear. "Help us." The flame sputtered, and the figure vanished. Darkness swallowed the room once more. Daniel and Arjun sat in stunned silence, their hearts racing. The house was no longer just haunted. It was pleading, the door that wouldn't stay shut. The night dragged on, and Daniel and Arjun felt as though time itself had slowed inside the house. Every minute stretched endlessly, filled with whispers, creaks, and shadows that refused to stay still. They had seen the ghostly figure of the mother, pale and sorrowful, pleading for help. Now, they could not shake the feeling that the house wanted them to uncover its secrets. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the living room. Both friends jumped to their feet, flashlights darting across the walls. One of the doors, the one leading to the cellar, had swung open on its own. The hinges groaned, and the darkness beyond seemed thicker than night itself. Arjun whispered, "It doesn't want us upstairs anymore. It wants us down there." Daniel swallowed hard. Or maybe that's where the truth is. They approached the cellar door cautiously. The air that drifted up from below was icy, carrying the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like rust or blood. Their flashlights flickered as they shone them into the stairwell. The steps descended into darkness, vanishing into a void that seemed endless. Daniel took a deep breath. "We have to go." Arjun shook his head violently. "No, we've seen enough." But Daniel's eyes were firm. "If we leave now, we'll never know what happened here. And I think she wants us to know." Reluctantly, Arjun followed. They descended the stairs, each step groaning under their weight. The deeper they went, the colder it became. their breath fogged in the air, and the walls seemed to close in around them. At the bottom, they found themselves in a vast cellar, its stone walls slick with moisture. Broken crates and barrels lay scattered, and the smell of decay was stronger here. In the center of the cellar stood a wooden chest, its lid slightly ajar. Daniel approached it, his flashlight trembling. He pushed the lid open, revealing old toys, faded photographs, and scraps of clothing. Among them was a small doll, its porcelain face cracked, its eyes staring blankly. Arjun picked it up, shivering. This belonged to one of the children. Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder than ever, echoing off the stone walls. The voices overlapped, crying, pleading, screaming. The air grew heavy, pressing down on them. The doll slipped from Arjun's hands, shattering on the floor. At that moment, the cellar door slammed shut above them, trapping them in darkness. Daniel shouted, "Who's there?" The whispers fell silent. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly. It was the father. His face was twisted with anguish, his body translucent, flickering like a dying flame. He raised a hand, pointing toward the chest. Daniel and Arjun froze. The ghost's mouth opened, and a single word echoed through the cellar. Buried. They dug through the chest, pulling out more scraps, until they found a bundle wrapped in cloth. With trembling hands, Daniel unwrapped it, revealing bones. Small, fragile, unmistakably human. Arjun gasped, dropping his flashlight. The children. They died here. The ghost of the father wailed, a sound that shook the cellar walls. He pointed again, his hollow eyes filled with sorrow. Then he vanished, leaving only silence. Daniel whispered. They weren't just haunted. They were trapped, murdered. Arjun's voice trembled. By who? Daniel looked at the bones, then at the diary in his hand. We have to keep reading. The truth is in her words. The house remembers. The cellar was silent after the father's ghost vanished, but the weight of his sorrow lingered. Daniel and Arjun stood frozen, staring at the bundle of bones they had uncovered. The whispers had stopped, yet the silence was worse. Heavy, suffocating, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Arjun whispered, "We shouldn't have come here." Daniel shook his head. "No, we were meant to." She asked for help. "We can't leave them like this." They carefully placed the bones back into the chest, covering them with the cloth. As they did, the air shifted. A faint glow appeared in the corner of the cellar, illuminating a hidden door they hadn't noticed before. It was small, wooden, and half buried in the wall. Arjun's flashlight trembled as he pointed at it. That wasn't there before. Daniel swallowed hard. The house is showing us the way. They approached the door. It creaked open on its own, revealing a narrow passage that descended deeper underground. The smell of damp earth grew stronger, mixed with something acrid like smoke. They hesitated, but the glow beckoned them forward. The passage led to a chamber, larger than the cellar above. In the center stood a stone altar, cracked and stained. Around it were symbols carved into the walls. Strange, jagged markings that pulsed faintly in the flashlight beams. Arjun shivered. This isn't just a house. It's a place of ritual. Daniel nodded grimly. That's why they died. Something was summoned here. Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder than ever, echoing through the chamber. The voices overlapped, crying, pleading, chanting. The air grew heavy, pressing down on them. The altar seemed to vibrate, and the markings glowed faintly. Daniel shouted, "What do you want from us?" The voices fell silent. Then a single phrase echoed clearly, "Remember us." The chamber grew colder. Shadows stretched across the walls, forming figures. The family, huddled together, their faces etched with fear. The mother stood at the front, her hollow eyes fixed on Daniel and Arjun. She raised her hand, pointing to the altar. Arjun whispered, "She wants us to finish what they couldn't." Daniel nodded. "We have to break the curse." They searched the chamber, finding more scraps of the diary hidden among the stones. The final entries revealed the truth. The family had been trapped by a ritual gone wrong. The father had tried to protect them, but the entity summoned by the markings had consumed them, binding their souls to the house. Arjun's voice trembled. "So if we destroy the altar," Daniel finished, "we free them." They gathered stones and broken wood, striking the altar with all their strength. The chamber shook, the whispers rising into screams. The markings glowed brighter, then began to fade. The altar cracked, crumbling under their blows. Suddenly, a deafening roar filled the chamber. A shadow rose from the altar, massive and writhing, its form shifting like smoke. Eyes glowed within it, burning with hatred. The entity had awakened. Daniel shouted, "Keep going." Arjun swung a broken beam, striking the altar again. The shadow shrieked, lashing out with tendrils of darkness. They ducked, barely avoiding its grasp. The chamber shook violently, stones falling from the ceiling. With one final strike, the altar shattered completely. The shadow screamed, its form unraveling, dissolving into mist. The chamber filled with light, blinding them. When the glow faded, the family stood before them. The mother, the father, the children. Their faces were peaceful now, no longer twisted by fear. The mother stepped forward, her translucent hand reaching toward Daniel. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, one by one, they faded into light, vanishing from the chamber. The whispers ceased. The house was silent. Daniel and Arjun collapsed, exhausted, their hearts pounding. The curse was broken. The family was free. The return of the shadows. Daniel and Arjun climbed back up from the cellar, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. They had shattered the altar, freed the family spirits, and for a moment, they believed the nightmare was over. The air felt lighter. The whispers had ceased, and the house seemed to rest in silence. But as they reached the living room, the silence grew heavier again. The fireplace loomed over them, its ashes cold and lifeless. The shadows along the walls began to stir, stretching unnaturally, curling into shapes that did not belong to the family they had freed. Arjun whispered, "I thought it was finished." Daniel shook his head. "No, the family is gone, but something else remains." The house groaned, its beams creaking as though under immense pressure. The floorboards trembled, and dust fell from the ceiling. The shadows thickened, merging into a single mass that hovered in the center of the room. Eyes glowed within it, burning with hatred. Daniel's voice cracked. "It's the entity, the one they summoned. It's still here." The shadow surged forward, lashing out with tendrils of darkness. Daniel and Arjun ducked, narrowly avoiding its grasp. The air grew colder, their breath fogging in the dim light. The entity shrieked, a sound that rattled their bones. Arjun shouted, "We destroyed the altar. Why is it still here?" Daniel's eyes widened. Because the altar wasn't the source. It was only the anchor. The house itself is the prison. The realization hit them like a blow. The entity wasn't bound to the altar. It was bound to the house. Every wall, every floorboard, every shadow was part of its cage. And now, with the family freed, it was furious. The entity surged again, slamming into the walls. The house shook violently. Windows shattering, doors flying open. The friends stumbled, trying to keep their footing. Daniel shouted, "We have to get out." Arjun nodded, panic in his eyes. Now. They grabbed their bags and ran for the front door. But as they reached it, the door slammed shut, locking itself. The entity's laughter echoed through the house, deep and mocking. Arjun pounded on the door. "Let us out." The shadows swirled, forming words across the walls. "Stay." Daniel turned, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "It wants us here. It wants to feed." The entity surged again, knocking them to the floor. Their flashlights rolled away, plunging them into near darkness. The shadows closed in, whispering, chanting, pressing against their skin. Arjun screamed, "What do we do?" Daniel's mind raced. "We have to burn it. The house. It's the only way." They scrambled to their feet, searching for anything flammable. The broken furniture, the torn wallpaper, the rotting curtains. All of it could serve as fuel. Daniel grabbed matches from his bag, his hands trembling. The entity shrieked, sensing their plan. It lashed out, knocking Arjun against the wall. He cried out in pain, clutching his shoulder. Daniel rushed to him, pulling him up. "Stay with me." Together, they piled the furniture in the center of the room. Daniel struck a match, the flame flickering weakly. The entity roared, the shadows swirling violently, trying to snuff it out. But Daniel shielded it with his hands, lowering it to the pile. The fire caught quickly, flames spreading across the room. The heat pushed back the shadows, the entity shrieking in fury. The house groaned, its walls trembling, its beams cracking. Arjun shouted, "It's working." Daniel nodded, sweat dripping down his face. "We have to keep it going." They fed the fire with everything they could find. Books, curtains, broken wood. The flames grew, consuming the room. The entity writhed, its form unraveling, dissolving into smoke. The house shook violently, the ceiling collapsing in places. The friends stumbled toward the door, which now hung loosely on its hinges. Daniel kicked it open, and they ran into the night, the cold air biting their skin. Behind them, the house burned, flames consuming it entirely. The entity screamed one final time, a sound that echoed across the village, then fell silent. Daniel and Arjun collapsed on the ground, watching as the house crumbled into ash. The fire lit up the night, casting long shadows across the fields. Arjun whispered, "It's over." Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, the family is free, and the house is gone. They sat in silence, watching the flames until dawn broke. The villagers arrived, staring in shock at the ruins. But Daniel and Arjun knew the truth. They had faced the darkness, and they had survived. Daniel and Arjun sat outside the ruins of the burning house, their bodies trembling from exhaustion and fear. The flames had consumed everything, and the entity's final scream still echoed in their minds. The villagers had gathered at a distance, whispering among themselves, afraid to come closer. The friends stared at the rising smoke, the night slowly giving way to dawn. The sky turned pale, streaked with orange and pink. But the beauty of the sunrise felt hollow against the destruction they had witnessed. Arjun whispered, "We survived. But at what cost?" Daniel shook his head. "We freed them. That's what matters." But even as he spoke, he felt uneasy. The house was gone, reduced to ash, yet the memory of the shadows lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that the entity wasn't truly destroyed, only scattered, waiting. The villagers approached cautiously. An old man stepped forward, his face lined with age and fear. "You burned the cursed house," he said. "We heard the screams. What did you see?" Daniel hesitated, then replied, The family was trapped. Their souls were bound to the house. We freed them. The old man's eyes widened, and the darkness. Daniel's voice grew quiet. It was there. We fought it. We burned it. But I don't know if it's gone. The villagers murmured among themselves, some crossing themselves, others shaking their heads. The old man nodded slowly. You did what none of us could. Perhaps now the village will know peace. Arjun whispered to Daniel. Do you believe that? Daniel sighed. I want to, but I don't. They spent the morning helping the villagers clear the ruins. The ashes were still warm, the smell of smoke heavy in the air. Among the debris, they found fragments of the diary, charred but legible. The final words were haunting. If anyone finds this, know that we are trapped. Free us, and beware the shadow. It cannot be destroyed, only contained. Daniel read the words aloud, his heart sinking. Arjun's face paled, contained, not destroyed. That means it's still out there. The villagers listened in silence. Fear etched on their faces. The old man spoke again. Then we must rebuild, not the house, but a shrine, a place of protection. The shadow must never return. Daniel and Arjun agreed to help. Together they gathered stones and wood, constructing a small shrine on the ruins. They placed the fragments of the diary inside, along with the broken doll they had found in the cellar. The villagers lit candles, their flames flickering in the morning breeze. As the shrine was completed, the air grew lighter. The oppressive weight that had hung over the village seemed to lift. The whispers were gone, replaced by silence that felt peaceful rather than suffocating. Arjun whispered, "Maybe this is enough." Daniel nodded. For now. But deep inside, both knew the truth. The shadow was not gone. It had been scattered, released into the world, and someday it would return. Echoes beyond the flames. The shrine stood quietly on the ruins of the old house, its candles flickering in the morning breeze. Daniel and Arjun had helped the villagers build it, believing it would keep the darkness contained. Yet, as they walked away from the ashes, a strange unease followed them. The air felt lighter, yes, but not empty. It was as though something unseen still lingered, watching, waiting. Daniel broke the silence. We burned the house. We freed the family. But the shadow, it's not gone. Arjun nodded reluctantly. I know, I can feel it. It's out there somewhere. They returned to the village, where the people greeted them with cautious gratitude. Children peeked from behind their mothers, whispering about the brave men who had faced the cursed house. The elders offered food and shelter, insisting they rest. But Daniel and Arjun could not sleep. Their minds replayed the screams, the whispers, the faces of the family. That night, as they lay in the guest house, Arjun stirred. Do you hear that? Daniel sat up, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, like a breeze carrying words, came the whispers. Not from the house. It was gone. But from the fields beyond the village. Daniel's heart sank. It followed us. Arjun's eyes widened. The shadow isn't bound to the house anymore. It's free. They grabbed their flashlights and stepped outside. The village was silent. The moon casting pale light across the fields. The whispers grew louder, circling them, pressing against their ears. Shadows stretched across the ground, twisting into unnatural shapes. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the field. Tall, gaunt, with glowing eyes. The same entity they had faced in the house. It had survived, scattered but not destroyed. Daniel whispered, "We can't fight it here. The village will suffer." Arjun nodded. "Then we take it away. Lead it out." They ran toward the forest, the entity following. its laughter echoing through the night. The trees loomed overhead, their branches clawing at the sky. The whispers grew louder, the shadows thicker. In the heart of the forest, they stopped, turning to face the entity. Daniel shouted, "Why do you haunt them? What do you want?" The shadow writhed, its form shifting. A voice echoed deep and hollow. "I want what was promised. Souls, fear, eternity." Arjun trembled. "It feeds on fear." Daniel's eyes hardened. "Then we don't give it any." They stood firm, refusing to run. The entity surged forward, its tendrils lashing out. But instead of screaming, instead of cowering, they faced it head on. Daniel shouted, "You have no power here." The entity shrieked, recoiling. Its form flickered, weakening. Arjun joined in, shouting, "You are nothing. You are forgotten." The forest echoed with their voices, drowning out the whispers. The entity writhed, its glowing eyes dimming. It lashed out one final time, but its tendrils dissolved into mist. With a scream that shook the trees, it vanished, leaving only silence. Daniel and Arjun collapsed, breathing heavily. The forest was quiet, the air lighter. For the first time, they felt the shadow was truly gone. Arjun whispered, "Did we destroy it?" Daniel shook his head. "Not destroy, defy. It feeds on fear, and we gave it none. That's the only way to fight it." They returned to the village at dawn, exhausted but triumphant. The people greeted them with relief, their fear replaced by hope. The shrine stood tall, its candles still burning. The family was free, the house was gone, and the shadow had been driven away. For now, peace had returned. The forest had swallowed the shadow, leaving Daniel and Arjun shaken but alive. They returned to the village at dawn, their clothes torn, their faces pale, but their spirits unbroken. The villagers gathered around them, listening in awe as they recounted the night's battle. The shrine still stood, its candles flickering, but the people knew the darkness had not been destroyed, only driven away. For days, the village remained quiet. No whispers haunted the nights. No shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. Children played in the fields again, laughter replacing fear. Yet Daniel and Arjun could not rest. They felt the silence was temporary, a fragile peace that could shatter at any moment. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Arjun sat by the shrine. He stared at the candles, their flames dancing in the breeze. "Do you think it's really gone?" he asked softly. Daniel joined him, his eyes fixed on the ruins. "No, evil like that doesn't vanish. It waits, it watches." The villagers had begun rebuilding homes near the ruins, believing the curse was lifted. But Daniel noticed something strange. The ground where the house had stood was still blackened, the soil refusing to grow grass. It was as though the earth itself remembered the shadow. That night, Daniel dreamed of the family. The mother appeared, her face peaceful, her voice gentle. "You freed us," she whispered. "But the shadow is not bound to this place anymore. It seeks new homes, new hearts." Daniel woke in a cold sweat, his heart pounding. He told Arjun, who listened in silence. "So it's not just this village," Arjun said. "It could spread anywhere." Daniel nodded grimly. "And we may be the only ones who know how to fight it." The next day, strange things began to happen. A child claimed to hear whispers in the fields. A farmer saw shadows moving across his barn at night. The villagers grew uneasy, their fear returning. Daniel and Arjun realized the truth. The shadow had not left. It had seeped into the land, into the air, into the hearts of those who feared it. Burning the house had freed it, and now it was everywhere. They gathered the villagers, speaking with urgency. You must not fear it, Daniel said. It feeds on fear. If you resist, if you defy it, it cannot harm you. But the villagers shook their heads. We are simple people, one said. We cannot fight shadows. Arjun stepped forward. Then we will fight for you. But you must stand with us. Together we can resist. The villagers agreed reluctantly. That night, they lit candles across the village, filling the streets with light. They sang songs, their voices rising against the whispers. Daniel and Arjun stood at the shrine, watching as the shadows gathered, swirling angrily. The entity appeared again, its form massive, its eyes burning. It roared, lashing out with tendrils of darkness. But the villagers did not run. They held their candles high, their voices strong. Daniel shouted, "You have no power here." Arjun joined him. "We are not afraid." The entity shrieked, recoiling. The light of the candles grew brighter, pushing back the shadows. The villagers' voices rose, drowning out the whispers. The entity writhed, its form unraveling, dissolving into mist. With one final scream, it vanished, leaving the village in silence. The people cheered, their fear replaced by hope. Daniel and Arjun smiled, exhausted but triumphant. They knew the battle was not over. The shadow could return, could spread to other places. But for now, the village was free. Arjun whispered, "We gave them courage." Daniel nodded. "And that's stronger than fear." The shadow's last breath. The village was quiet after the night of defiance. Candles still burned at the shrine, their flames steady, their light a symbol of courage. Daniel and Arjun walked through the streets, greeted by smiles instead of fear. For the first time since arriving, they felt the weight of the curse had lifted. But peace is fragile. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel felt a chill in the air. The silence was too deep, too heavy. He turned to Arjun. "It's not finished." Arjun frowned. "We defeated it twice." Daniel shook his head. "We resisted it, but it's not gone. It's waiting." The villagers gathered at the shrine, singing softly, their voices rising against the night. The flames flickered, casting long shadows across the ruins. Suddenly, the air shifted. The candles sputtered, their flames shrinking. The whispers returned, faint but unmistakable. Arjun's eyes widened. "It's back." Daniel clenched his fists. "This is the last time. We end it tonight." The ground trembled, and from the ruins rose the shadow, larger than before, its form towering, its eyes burning like fire. It roared, shaking the village, scattering the people. The entity had grown stronger, feeding on the fear that lingered in their hearts. Daniel shouted, "Stay together, don't run." But panic spread quickly. The villagers fled, their candles extinguished. The shadow laughed, its voice deep and mocking. Arjun grabbed Daniel's arm. "We can't fight it alone." Daniel's eyes hardened. "We don't have to. We fight with light, with courage. That's what it fears." They ran to the shrine, relighting the candles, their flames flickering weakly. Daniel raised one high, shouting, "We are not afraid." The shadow recoiled, its form flickering. Arjun joined him, shouting, "You cannot take us." The villagers, hearing their voices, returned slowly, one by one. They relit their candles, their flames growing stronger. The light spread across the village, pushing back the darkness. The shadow shrieked, lashing out with tendrils of smoke. But the villagers stood firm, their voices rising in defiance. The flames grew brighter, merging into a single blaze that lit up the night. Daniel shouted, "This is your end." Arjun cried, "We banish you." The blaze consumed the shadow, its form unraveling. dissolving into mist. It screamed one final time, a sound that shook the earth, then vanished completely. The night fell silent, the air lighter than ever before. The villagers cheered, their fear replaced by joy. The shrine glowed brightly, its candles steady. Daniel and Arjun collapsed, exhausted but triumphant. Arjun whispered, "It's over." Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, truly over. The family was free, the house was gone, and the shadow had been banished. The village was safe, its people united by courage. Daniel and Arjun had faced the darkness and won. As dawn broke, the sky painted in hues of gold and pink, the friends stood together watching the sunrise. The nightmare was behind them, and the future was bright. The journey beyond the village. The village had found peace, but Daniel and Arjun knew their work was not finished. The shadow had been banished, yes, but the diary's final words haunted them. It cannot be destroyed, only contained. That meant the entity could rise again, somewhere else, feeding on fear wherever it found it. Daniel stood at the shrine one morning, watching the candles flicker. "We can't stay here forever," he said. "If the shadow spreads, others will suffer." Arjun nodded reluctantly. "So we leave. We follow it." The villagers gathered to bid them farewell. The old man who had first spoken to them pressed a small charm into Daniel's hand, a carved stone with protective symbols. "Take this," he said. "It carries our courage. Wherever you go, remember us." With heavy hearts, Daniel and Arjun left the village, walking into the forest. The air was crisp, the path winding, but the silence was unsettling. They felt watched, though no shadow appeared. Days passed as they traveled from town to town. In one village, they heard of children waking in the night, claiming to see figures at the foot of their beds. In another, farmers spoke of whispers in the fields. The shadow had spread, subtle but persistent. Daniel whispered to Arjun one night, "It's testing us. It wants us to chase it." Arjun frowned. "Or it wants us to tire ourselves out." They pressed on, determined. In a small town by the river, they found a church abandoned, its walls blackened by fire. Inside, the whispers were strongest. Shadows clung to the corners, shifting unnaturally. Daniel raised the charm, its symbols glowing faintly. The whispers faltered, the shadows recoiling. Arjun lit candles, their flames pushing back the darkness. Together they stood firm, shouting into the void, "We are not afraid." The shadows writhed, then dissolved, leaving the church silent. The townspeople, who had gathered outside, cheered. They had seen courage, and their fear lessened. But Daniel and Arjun knew this was only one battle. The shadow was vast, spreading across lands, feeding on fear wherever it could. They could not destroy it, but they could teach others to resist. So their journey became a mission. In every town, they lit candles, built shrines, and taught the people to stand together. They told the story of the cursed house, the trapped family, and the shadow that fed on fear. They showed that courage was stronger than darkness. Slowly, the shadow weakened. Its whispers grew fainter, its appearances rarer. The people no longer cowered. They defied it, and with every act of defiance, the entity lost power. One night, as Daniel and Arjun camped by the river, the mother's ghost appeared once more. Her face was peaceful, her voice gentle. "You have done what we could not," she whispered. "You have given the world courage. The shadow will fade, not because it is destroyed, but because it is forgotten." Daniel bowed his head. "Thank you." Arjun smiled softly. "Rest now. Your family is free. The ghost faded into the night, leaving only the sound of the river. Daniel and Arjun sat in silence, knowing their journey was not over. But their mission was clear. Wherever fear rose, they would bring light. Wherever shadows gathered, they would teach courage. And slowly, the world would forget the shadow, the road of light. Daniel and Arjun had left the village behind, carrying with them the memory of the family they freed and the shadow they had defied. Their journey was no longer about survival. It had become a mission. Wherever fear lingered, they would bring courage. Wherever shadows whispered, they would bring light. The road stretched endlessly before them, winding through forests, valleys, and towns. In each place, they found traces of the shadow. Whispers in the night, figures at the edge of vision, children waking in terror. But they also found people willing to resist once they were shown how. Daniel lit candles in every town, teaching the people to stand together. Arjun told the story of the cursed house, of the family trapped, of the shadow that fed on fear. Slowly, the legend spread. Villages began building shrines, lighting flames against the darkness. The shadow weakened, its whispers fading. One evening, as they camped by a river, Daniel looked at Arjun. Do you ever wonder why us? Why we were chosen? Arjun smiled faintly. Maybe because we didn't run. Maybe because we listened. Daniel nodded. Or maybe because courage is contagious. We showed it once, and now it spreads. Their journey took them to a city larger than any village they had seen. The people there laughed at their warnings, dismissing the idea of shadows and curses. But when the whispers began, when the lights flickered and the fear grew, they remembered Daniel and Arjun's words. They built a shrine, lit candles, and stood together. The shadow recoiled, unable to feed. Daniel realized then that the shadow was not a monster to be slain, but a weakness to be overcome. It thrived only where fear ruled. Where courage lived, it starved. The circle of fire. Daniel and Arjun's journey had carried them far from the cursed house, far from the village where it all began. Yet the shadow's memory lingered, and they knew their mission was not over. The world was vast, and fear was everywhere. If the shadow fed on fear, then their task was endless. To teach courage, to spread light, to build shrines where darkness once ruled. They arrived at a valley where the people lived in constant dread. The villagers spoke of figures in the mist, of voices calling their names at night. Children refused to sleep, and the elders whispered that the land itself was cursed. Daniel and Arjun listened, their hearts heavy. They had heard this story before, in many places. The shadow had spread again. Daniel stood before the villagers. We have faced this darkness. It cannot harm you if you resist. Fear is its food. Courage is its fire. Arjun lit candles, placing them in a circle around the village square. Stand together. Hold the light. Do not run. The villagers hesitated, but slowly they joined. Each person held a candle, their flames flickering in the night. The circle of fire grew, surrounding them with light. The whispers began, faint at first, then louder. Shadows stretched across the valley, twisting into unnatural shapes. The entity appeared, massive and writhing, its eyes burning with hatred. It roared, shaking the earth, lashing out with tendrils of darkness. But the villagers did not flee. They held their candles high, their voices rising in defiance. Daniel shouted, "We are not afraid." Arjun cried, "You have no power here." The flames grew brighter, merging into a single blaze that lit up the valley. The shadow shrieked, recoiling, its form unraveling. The villagers' courage was stronger than their fear. and the entity weakened. Daniel raised the charm the old man had given him, its symbols glowing. The shadow screamed, its form dissolving into mist. With one final roar, it vanished, leaving the valley in silence. The villagers cheered, their fear replaced by joy. They built a shrine in the square, lighting candles every night. The valley was free, its people united by courage. Daniel and Arjun smiled, exhausted but triumphant. They knew the shadow was not gone forever, but each victory weakened it. Each act of courage starved it. Someday it would fade completely. That night, as they sat by the fire, Arjun whispered, "Do you think we'll ever see the end?" Daniel stared into the flames. "Yes, not today, not tomorrow, but someday. When courage spreads far enough, the shadow will vanish. And when it does, we'll rest." The stars shone brightly above them, the night peaceful. For the first time, they felt hope not just for themselves, but for the world. The quiet horizon. Daniel and Arjun had carried light across forests, valleys, mountains, and seas. Everywhere they went, they taught people to resist fear, to stand together, to light candles against the whispers. The shadow had weakened, its presence fading with every act of courage. Yet they knew their journey was not only about fighting darkness, it was about building hope. They arrived at a desert village where the nights were long and the winds carried strange voices. The people there had lived in silence, too afraid to speak of what haunted them. Daniel and Arjun listened, their hearts heavy. They had heard this story before, but each time it was different. Each time it was personal. Daniel stood before the villagers. Fear is the gate. Courage is the key. You are not alone. Arjun lit candles, placing them in a circle around the village square. Stand together. Hold the light. Do not run. The villagers hesitated, but slowly they joined. Each person held a candle, their flames flickering in the desert wind. The circle of fire grew, surrounding them with light. The whispers rose, carried by the wind, louder and louder. Shadows stretched across the sand, twisting into unnatural shapes. The entity appeared once more, vast and writhing, its eyes burning with hatred. It roared, shaking the earth, lashing out with tendrils of darkness. But the villagers did not flee. They held their candles high, their voices rising in defiance. Daniel shouted, "We are not afraid." Arjun cried, "You have no power here." The flames grew brighter, merging into a single blaze that lit up the desert. The shadow shrieked, recoiling, its form unraveling. The villagers' courage was stronger than their fear, and the entity weakened. Daniel raised the charm, its symbols glowing. The shadow screamed, its form dissolving into mist. With one final roar, it vanished, leaving the desert in silence. The villagers cheered, their fear replaced by joy. They built a shrine in the square, lighting candles every night. The desert was free, its people united by courage. Daniel and Arjun smiled, exhausted but triumphant. They knew the shadow was not gone forever, but each victory weakened it. Each act of courage starved it. Someday it would fade completely. That night, as they sat by the fire, Arjun whispered, "Do you think this is the last time?" Daniel stared into the flames. Maybe, or maybe it will rise again. But each time it grows weaker. Each time we grow stronger. The stars shone brightly above them, the desert peaceful. For the first time, they felt hope not just for themselves, but for the world. The Lantern Keepers. Daniel and Arjun had become legends. Wherever they traveled, people spoke of the two wanderers who carried light against the darkness. Shrines burned brightly in villages, monasteries, and towns. The shadow had grown weaker, its whispers fading. But they knew it was never truly gone. Fear was everywhere. And as long as fear lived, the shadow could return. Their journey brought them to a great city, bustling with life but haunted by silence at night. The people whispered of figures in alleyways, of voices calling from rooftops. The city was vast, and fear spread quickly. Daniel and Arjun realized this would be their greatest challenge. They gathered the people in the central square. Daniel raised his voice. Fear is the gate. Courage is the key. You are not alone. Arjun lit lanterns, placing them across the square. Stand together. Hold the light. Do not run. The people hesitated, but slowly they joined. Each person held a lantern, its flame flickering against the night. The square glowed, a sea of light. The whispers rose, louder than ever, echoing through the streets. Shadows stretched across the buildings, twisting into monstrous shapes. The entity appeared, vast and towering, its eyes burning with hatred. It roared, shaking the city, lashing out with tendrils of darkness. But the people did not flee. They held their lanterns high, their voices rising in defiance. Daniel shouted, "We are not afraid." Arjun cried, "You have no power here." The flames grew brighter, merging into a single blaze that lit up the city. The shadow shrieked, recoiling, its form unraveling. The people's courage was stronger than their fear, and the entity weakened. Daniel raised the charm, its symbols glowing. The shadow screamed, its form dissolving into mist. With one final roar, it vanished, leaving the city in silence. The people cheered, their fear replaced by joy. They built a great shrine in the square, lighting lanterns every night. The city was free, its people united by courage. Daniel and Arjun smiled, exhausted but triumphant. They knew the shadow was not gone forever, but each victory weakened it. Each act of courage starved it. Someday it would fade completely. That night, as they stood on the rooftops, Arjun whispered, "Do you think this is the last time?" Daniel stared at the lanterns glowing across the city. Maybe, or maybe it will rise again. But each time it grows weaker. Each time we grow stronger. The stars shone brightly above them. The city, peaceful. For the first time, they felt hope not just for themselves, but for the world. The last ember. Daniel and Arjun had carried light across deserts, forests, valleys, mountains, and seas. Everywhere they went, shrines burned brightly, villages stood united, and the shadow weakened. Yet they knew their journey was nearing its end. The world had learned courage, and the shadow had fewer places to hide. They arrived at a ruined fortress on a hill, said to be the birthplace of the shadow. The villagers nearby spoke of strange lights at night, of whispers echoing across the stones. Daniel and Arjun felt the chill immediately. This was not just another haunting. This was the source. Inside the fortress, the air was heavy. The walls cracked and blackened. The whispers rose louder than ever, circling them, pressing against their ears. Shadows stretched across the floor, twisting into monstrous shapes. The entity appeared, vast and towering, its eyes burning with hatred. Daniel raised the charm, its symbols glowing. "This is where it began," he whispered. Arjun nodded. "Then this is where it ends." They lit candles across the fortress, their flames flickering against the walls. The villagers joined, their voices rising in defiance. The fortress glowed, a sea of light. The entity roared, lashing out with tendrils of darkness. But the people did not flee. They held their candles high, their voices strong. Daniel shouted, "We are not afraid." Arjun cried, "You have no power here." The flames grew brighter, merging into a single blaze that lit up the fortress. The shadow shrieked, recoiling, its form unraveling. The people's courage was stronger than their fear, and the entity weakened. Daniel stepped forward, shouting, "You are forgotten." Arjun raised his torch, crying, "You are banished." The blaze consumed the shadow, its form dissolving into mist. With one final scream, it vanished, leaving the fortress in silence. The villagers cheered, their fear replaced by joy. They built a shrine in the fortress, lighting candles every night. The birthplace of the shadow became its grave. Daniel and Arjun stood together, exhausted but triumphant. Arjun whispered, "It's over." Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, truly over. As dawn broke, the sky painted in hues of gold and pink. The friends stood together, watching the sunrise. The nightmare was behind them, and the future was bright. The shadow was gone, and courage had won. Their pilgrimage was complete. The eternal watch. Daniel and Arjun had carried courage across the world. Villages, towns, monasteries, and cities now glowed with shrines and lanterns, their flames burning against the night. The shadow had weakened with every act of defiance, every candle lit, every voice raised in courage. Yet they knew their journey was not truly finished. Fear was eternal, and as long as fear existed, the shadow could return. They arrived at a mountain peak where an ancient temple stood. The monks there spoke of visions in the night, of whispers carried by the wind. Daniel and Arjun felt the chill immediately. This was not the shadow's birthplace, nor its grave. It was its watchtower, a place where it lingered, waiting. Inside the temple, the air was heavy, the walls etched with symbols of protection. The monks had resisted for centuries, but their strength was fading. Daniel raised the charm, its symbols glowing faintly. "This is where we make our stand," he whispered. Arjun nodded. "The last stand." They lit candles across the temple, their flames flickering against the stone walls. The monks joined, their voices rising in chants of courage. The temple glowed, a sea of light. The whispers rose, louder than ever, circling them, pressing against their ears. Shadows stretched across the floor, twisting into monstrous shapes. The entity appeared, vast and towering, its eyes burning with hatred. It roared, shaking the mountain, lashing out with tendrils of darkness. But Daniel and Arjun did not flee. They held their candles high, their voices strong. Daniel shouted, "We are not afraid." Arjun cried, "You have no power here." The flames grew brighter, merging into a single blaze that lit up the temple. The shadow shrieked, recoiling, its form unraveling. The monks' courage was stronger than their fear, and the entity weakened. Daniel stepped forward, shouting, "You are forgotten." Arjun raised his torch, crying, "You are banished." The blaze consumed the shadow, its form dissolving into mist. With one final scream, it vanished, leaving the temple in silence. The monks cheered, their fear replaced by joy. They built a great shrine in the temple, lighting candles every night. The mountain was free, its people united by courage. Daniel and Arjun stood together, exhausted but triumphant. Arjun whispered, "It's over." Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, truly over. As dawn broke, the sky painted in hues of gold and pink. The friends stood together, watching the sunrise. The nightmare was behind them, and the future was bright. The shadow was gone, and courage had won. Their pilgrimage was complete. Yet they knew their mission was eternal. Fear would always exist. But so would courage. And as long as courage lived, the shadow could never return. Daniel and Arjun became the Eternal Watch, guardians of light, keepers of courage, wanderers who carried hope wherever they went. The dawn of courage. Daniel and Arjun walked a long way. They spread light against the darkness, resisted fear, and taught people that courage is the true strength. Villages, cities, mountains, deserts, seas, everywhere they lit torches, and every torch, every candle, every voice weakened the shadow. But they knew the shadow is never completely destroyed. As long as fear exists, the shadow will live. So their journey is not over, rather eternal. For the last time, they returned to the place where everything had begun, the ruins of the broken house. Now, there stands a small shrine filled with candlelight. The villagers light it every night, and whispers and coldness never return. Daniel smiled softly. Look, it all began here, and it ends here. Arjun shook his head and said, no, this is not the end. This is a new beginning. We have taught that fear can be overcome. Now people will light the lamps themselves. They stood before the shrine and lit candles. The light slowly spread all around, and in that light, they saw the spirits of the family with peaceful faces standing free. Mother, father, and children. They smiled and slowly faded away into the dawn light. Daniel whispered, "You are free now." Arjun closed his eyes and said, "We have finished our work." The sun rose, the sky turned golden, the villagers smiled, the children played, and fear moved away forever. Daniel and Arjun looked at each other. They knew their journey was over. The shadow was no more. Courage had triumphed. They slowly began to walk, fading into the dawn light, and their story became legend. Two friends who spread light against the darkness and taught the world that courage is the true strength. If you like these types of story videos, be sure to subscribe.